Well, shalom, y'all. We are so glad that you have joined us for this week's teaching. You know, his word tells us, great shalom have those who love his Torah, and nothing will cause them to stumble. So we are still going through the book of First Kings. We are now actually going to be reading a passage where Solomon's son is now beginning to reign and sit on the throne in Israel, and that is Rehoboam. So we're going to start here in 1 Kings chapter 12 and verse 1. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt, and they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, go away for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet still alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them, and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, thus shall you speak to this people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplines you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king said, come to me again the 3rd day. And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, and he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by Yahweh, that he might fulfill his word, which Yahweh spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Okay, so as we're reading here, Rehoboam has now become king, and it appears that almost immediately upon Rehoboam becoming king, the people of Israel approach Rehoboam about the taxation that is upon them and about the heavy work that they're having to do. When we think about Solomon, Solomon is considered a great king of Israel. He was considered the wisest. The Bible calls him the wisest man. He was definitely the wisest king that Israel ever had, and he built the temple. So in the process of building the nation of Israel, Israel built and they gained a lot of resources. They had boats, they had the temple. Solomon built himself a house. The nation of Israel really prospered underneath Solomon and grew. Okay, he was a great king. But because of this growth and all that occurred, Solomon asked a lot of the people. The people had to pay taxes, and they paid a lot of services to fulfill the things that Solomon was doing. But it seems that the nation of Israel followed Solomon, And it seems to be that they did not follow him out of a sense of fear, but out of a shared vision and purpose, that they were on board with Solomon was doing. But as this stuff was accomplished, it appears that Israel is at a point where they're like, enough is enough. We need a break. And the people of Israel are now coming to Rehoboam saying, we need relief. We want relief from what is going on. And we will give our allegiance unto you if you break this heavy yoke that is upon us. They served underneath the heavy yoke for Solomon, and it seems they did it for the purpose of what he was doing. But the season had come where they became tired of that heavy yoke, and they wanted out from underneath it. So when Rehoboam approaches and asks for wisdom, he gets two different answers. And it appears in this story that Rehoboam did not appeal to the sense of a shared vision and purpose with the nation of Israel that Solomon did. So Rehoboam wasn't going to be able to do the things that Solomon did and prosper and have favor with the nation of Israel because he didn't seem to have their hearts like Solomon did. It seems that Rehoboam's approach was, instead of leading the people in a shared vision or purpose, it was simply he wanted to lead the people out of the fear of a tyrant. And that did not work out well for Rehoboam, because what we see is underneath Rehoboam, the kingdom is going to split. And Rehoboam is left with one tribe. So we think about the things that Solomon accomplished. Of course, we see that he built the temple. So let's read in 1 Kings chapter 9, and we're going to see here in this passage the things that Solomon had accomplished while he was king, the things that were built and the things that he did, and the labor and what was required of the people in order to fulfill what he did. Remember, the queen of Sheba came and looked at what he had and was amazed at what the wisdom he had and what he had built in the temple and in his house. It was extravagant, and this cost the people dearly in order to build this. So 1 Kings chapter 9 and verse 15. And this is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon drafted to build the house of Yahweh in his own house, in the Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazar, and Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it with fire, and had killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer and lower Beth-horon and Belath and Tamar in the wilderness and the land of Judah. In all the store cities that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots, and the cities for his horsemen, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and Lebanon and all the land of his dominion. And all the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the people of Israel, their descendants, who were left after them in the land, whom the people of Israel were unable to devote to destruction, these Solomon drafted to be slaves. And so they are to this day. But of the people of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. They were soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. So we read of the cities that he built. Later on in the chapter, it talks about the ships and the boats that he had built to go out to get merchants. And so we see how he used the people. Now, he did not enslave the children of Israel. We read here in this passage that the people of Israel were no slaves. They were the soldiers, and they were officials and commanders and captains over those who were leading the slave forces of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. Okay. But still, the toil that was upon Israel to accomplish the task of what they were doing. They still worked hard. They just were not slaves. And so it had come to the point where all this stuff had been built, and Israel was a great nation. The people of Israel needed that break. And remember, God had warned Israel about the heavy taxation that would come through a king. He warned Israel of this, of what would happen if they chose to have a king over him. Because when Israel chose a king, in a sense, they rejected God. They rejected his rulership. So by choosing a king, they put themselves in a situation for Rehoboam, for one to come in with heavy taxation, to work the people hard, as Solomon did. And when the people asked for a break, the response of Rehoboam is not to give them a break, but to increase the load that is upon them and to try to rule them in fear, which is opposite of the character of our God. When our burden is heavy and we cry out for help, he lightens our load. His yoke is easy. When Israel cried out while in slavery in Egypt, he heard them and he delivered them. He brought them out of Egypt. So we see the difference in the character between Rehoboam and Yahweh. So when they chose a king, they're rejecting Yahweh, their heavenly Father, who loves them, whose desire is to provide for them, protect them, bless them. And under him, they have a light, easy yoke. The burden is easy, it's light. But under Rehoboam, it was heavy. Let's read the passage here where they chose a king. And remember, they pick a king because they wanted to be like the other nations. They wanted to be like everybody else instead of being set apart and ruled by Yahweh. And so in desiring to be like everybody else, they chose to put themselves under a heavy burden. When we seek and choose to walk like the world and to be like the world and act like the world and talk like the world, we put ourselves under that heavy burden of sin. The discipline, the punishment, and the consequences of walking in sin instead of walking in obedience to Yahweh. When we walk in obedience with Yahweh, when we walk with him, our burden is light. It's easy. When we're ruled by him and we serve him, we have a light, easy burden. But when we serve the world, when we serve conformity to the world, then we see ourselves being ruled by a heavy ruler, and that is sin. 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 10. So Samuel told all the words of Yahweh to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest. and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and your female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But Yahweh will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us. When we read this passage in 1 Samuel, we see a glimpse and we see exactly what it was like underneath King Solomon. The very thing that Yahweh told Israel would happen if they chose a king is what occurred underneath Solomon. And when the people cried out for help, they did not get an answer from Yahweh because they had rejected him as king. Instead, they get a different answer, not the answer they wanted. So we see verse 18 occur in the story of Rehoboam. And we also going to see here later that there was something else at work and at play as to why Rehoboam refused to listen to the people as well. So the people of Israel rejected Yahweh to be ruled by a king and told them, "In that day you will cry out because of how heavy the burden is upon you, and I will not answer you in that day." So as we go back to Rehoboam, he rejected the advice of the older men, and instead he chose to take the advice of the younger men. The young men he grew up with, probably his friends, those who thought like him, who he related to. The old men who had served with his father, he didn't relate to. They didn't think alike. They didn't have the same thoughts. He asked them, but we have to wonder is, when he asked them, did he really want to hear what they were saying? Or did he just ask them for show to make it look good? But we do see in here is this idea of going around and asking advice until you get the answer you want to hear. Have you ever done that before? Where you are looking for an answer on something, you'll ask this person and they'll give you a response, and you may not like that answer. So then you'll go ask somebody else, and then you'll ask somebody else. And basically you will ask somebody until somebody confirms what you want to hear. And that's what we see with Rehoboam. I believe Rehoboam wanted to hear what the young men said to him. He did not want to hear what the old men had to say. You could say this is an unwise and ungodly way to get counsel. It's better to receive counsel from a few people you trust that you will listen to, even though they may tell you something you don't want to hear. You have to be willing to hear something you don't want to hear, receive it, and do it. If when you hear something you don't like, and you choose not to do it, that's just being stubborn and being hard-headed and wanting to do it your way. And ultimately, why even ask? Just do what you're going to do. We also see with the men, had he listened to the older men, and what we see with this is there is wisdom and there's things that we can pick up from seeking counsel from people who are outside of our immediate situation and context. There is a benefit to receiving advice from people you could say are not within your inner circle that you're with every single day, spending time with every single day, who may have a little different perspective of looking at it than you do. Because sometimes where they are, they actually might be able to see it a little bit more clearly than where you are. You know, in Solomon, you think about this, Solomon had built this great kingdom, this great nation. And the idea that he would leave this nation that he had built to his son, and that his son would destroy it, you could say. That here is one of the wisest kings to ever rule. And his son turns out to probably be one of the biggest or most foolish kings that ruled Israel. It's kind of amazing when you think about it that way. And that Rehoboam, basically, kingdom is split, and what Solomon had built and worked for, was it in vain? Listen to Solomon's thoughts on this in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 18. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be a master of all which I have toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. Solomon, at the end of his life, sees that all that he had done in Israel was vanity. Because if his son, the man who came to rule after him, if he would be a fool, then all the work he had done was in vain. Now, Rehoboam, rejecting to hear the people and the advice of the older men, as I said before, was a turn of events from Yahweh. This occurred because of the sin of Solomon. So Solomon's wisdom, he builds this great nation. He has this fear, you could say this thought at the end of his life that everything he built could be lost by the foolishness of his son. But the question is, was the foolishness of his son a result of Solomon? Because Solomon, being the wisest man on earth and building this great nation, had a weakness. And that weakness was women. And these women had pulled his heart away from Yahweh. And because they had pulled his heart away from Yahweh, God told him that the kingdom would be split under the next king. So it was Solomon's sin that ultimately led, you could say, to Rehoboam and how he acted and how he behaved. 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. For they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to Yahweh his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh and did not wholly follow Yahweh as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. And Yahweh was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what Yahweh had commanded. Therefore, Yahweh said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, if you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. So Solomon, the wisest king that Israel had, but yet was foolish when it came to this sin. And because of this sin, this shows you that we all have a weakness. We all have our flesh that we're struggling with. Even the wisest king that Israel had, the wisest man that the Bible said walked on this earth, was foolish enough to be led away from Yahweh by these foreign women. And because of that, his son followed him as one of the foolish kings that Israel ever had. And the kingdom was ripped in two underneath Rehoboam. So let's remain in humility and know that no matter how smart or how wise we may think we are, we all have our vulnerabilities when it comes to the areas of the flesh. And we need to be open to God's word, to allow his word to convict our hearts. As I read through this last passage, it says that Yahweh approached Solomon about the idol worship, but he chose. It says he appeared unto him twice concerning the things of the foreign wives and sacrificing to their gods, but he chose not to hear him. We have to be careful of rejecting him when he appears unto us to bring correction. We have to be careful of making a practice of sinning. That's what it says. Since this has been your practice. And we need to be open to hear the voice of those when they bring correction. And we need to be open when we go and seek advice, that we are not like Rehoboam, that we're not seeking out the answer we want to hear, but we're truly seeking out what is the right answer. Well, hallelujah. We are so glad that you have joined us this week. We will be back again next week with another teaching. So come back and join us, and shalom, y'all.